This video will deal with training methods and look at the advantages and disadvantages of different types of training method. However, before we start that, please look to the bottom right hand corner of the screen where you'll see that there are 81 slides here. This is a big video. There's a lot of material in here and you may wish to have several breaks whilst viewing it. You may wish to turn it off, have a break, do something else and return to it later. If you decide to take a very fast route, nearly all of the material I'm going to speak about will appear on the video. So you may use the forward and backwards slide and pick out individual pieces of information and make notes yourself from the video viewer. But as I said, it's a long video and well worth taking several breaks. Leave it for a while, come back and pick it up. But having said that, let's deal with it. I'm not quite sure how long it's going to take in total, but it's a pretty long video. So let's start talking about training methods, look at the advantages and disadvantages of each. First of all, we'll start by talking about the types of training. Well, we have on-the-job training, on-the-job instructions. We have job rotation as a type of training. Shadowing, and I'll talk about what's meant by all of these later. Project-related training, and coaching and methods. So we have different types of training we may identify. Now we're going to start by looking at on-the-job instructions, and then we'll move on later to job rotation, shadowing and so on. So let's start with on-the-job instructions. Now let's look at the advantages and disadvantages of each point here. First of all, on-the-job instructions is cost-effective and economical. It is efficient. On-the-job instructions means perhaps a mentor or an experienced member of staff will instruct perhaps a new member of staff or someone who is retraining in a section, and in that sense it's not a costly exercise. It means someone is passing on his or her experience and there is a recipient who is gaining that knowledge. So it's quite a cheap way of getting training done. The disadvantage is that the person who's passing on the knowledge may also pass on bad habits and bad working techniques. So the trainer or the mentor, whoever's doing it, needs to be experienced, needs to be briefed and instructed how to deliver on-the-job instructions. Otherwise, the person who is passing on the information may pass on bad habits. So there is a danger with this type of instruction. The trainee receives immediate feedback and improvements can be made. So that's an advantage. The trainee is shown how to do the job, then asked to perform the task, and will get immediate feedback as to his or her performance. And that's good. But could have a negative impact on productivity. For example, the trainee makes errors or works slower than the team. So the trainee may slow everything down. So there may be a loss of productivity associated as well. So there are disadvantages in that case. It's also an advantage that establishment of better working relationships between trainee and instructor. A rapport may develop between the instructor and the trainee. They may get to like each other, understand their comments. They may share views and similar ideas about things. So they may have a good working relationship. The disadvantage is insufficient theory and knowledge. The trainee is taught how to do it rather than why they are doing it. and this could impact on decision making in the future. So the trainee is taught how to do it, but not why, or not how it works in detail, just perform the particular task. So the trainee does not have a wide knowledge of what's happening, just sufficient knowledge to perform the task, and that is a disadvantage. Training is specific and to its purpose. So there is a high transfer of learning. I mean, that is good. The trainee receives a lot of information from the instructor, a lot of experience, and a lot of points that if something goes wrong, his or her experience in the past suggested this remedial course of action. So there's a lot of good points passed on, and there's a high transfer of learning. The disadvantage of this type of instruction is it's generally one-to-one. It's difficult for a trainer to instruct more than one person. There are all sorts of issues in group situations. People become distracted, some people can't hear, can't understand what's happening, and perhaps have to seek clarification, holds everybody up, and there's frustration within the group. So there are disadvantages as well. So this particular slide has got a list of advantages and disadvantages of on-the-job instructions, and it's well worth making a note of that slide. Now the next one we'll look at is job rotation. Again, advantages and disadvantages. There are opportunities to develop new skills and knowledge, experience different job roles. So that's an advantage. People perhaps work in a certain task for a long time, and they become bored and quite alienated from the task and from the institution, from the company, or even from their own work group. So when they have an opportunity to change job roles, it refreshes them. They become more enthusiastic again. It's a new experience. They start to enjoy the experience. They start to get along with people better, and they're not so frustrated or not so bored. It's a new experience. The disadvantage is that it disrupts working patterns and schedules. That an experienced person is moved off to get new experiences in terms of the job rotation plan, but in moving off they leave a void. They leave a job that needs to be done, and perhaps the person who follows on will not have the same experience or the same understanding, and cannot handle situations as well because they don't have the accumulated experience of the person who's moved on. So work patterns and schedules can be disrupted. Another advantage is it increases productivity, as job rotation prevents boredom and demotivation, as I suggested in the previous point as well. So productivity may increase. Overall productivity may increase because there's more enthusiasm on the part of the worker. But there is a disadvantage because the worker who's moved on has to be trained in that particular task. So there is a cost, and that may be considerable depending on the complexity of the task. Again, an advantage is it allows employees to fill other job roles due to absenteeism. The workforce become, in a sense, multi-skilled. They're able to do several tasks because they've had experience. The job rotation has enabled them to pick up experience in different parts of the organization. So if in the future someone's away ill or there's some sort of absenteeism, that role may be filled by an existing person because they've had the experience. They've had a period of time on the job rotation program working in that area, and they're able to fill the task when that person's away. A disadvantage can also have a negative impact on productivity. It takes time to learn new skills and train employees. So job rotation is not costless. It does mean that the employee has to be trained. An advantage is it helps management identify hidden talents. Sometimes management assign workers to particular roles, but they may not necessarily assign the right workers to the right roles. They think that they've done a good job, but in fact the workers would have been better suited in different roles. Now a job rotation program will enable this to be highlighted and rectified, that some workers will have particular skills that are only spotted after a period in job rotation. So now the workers can be more accurately assigned according to their skills and interests. The disadvantage is constant job rotation may impact on quality of products and services. If it's constantly happening, constant job rotation, the quality of the products may suffer because the employees don't have a great expertise in all job areas. So inevitably someone will be assigned a task in terms of the job rotation program, and they haven't got an expertise in that particular task. So they can't do a good job. Productivity may fall and quality may be impacted as well. Now let's move to shadowing. Again, advantages and disadvantages. To start, in shadowing, observer gains experience of the job and its role and responsibilities. So that's an advantage. The observer, the person who is watching the experienced worker, is gaining experience. They're getting an insight into the job and its roles and its responsibilities, and indeed even its manner and its way of emerging. In other words, the different techniques that are required, the different processes that have to be undertaken until the job comes to fruition, comes to the end. The disadvantages: the observer may pick bad habits from other employees. Simply because someone is shadowing somebody else, the person being shadowed, who should have more knowledge and more experience, they may also have picked up bad habits as well, and the observer will therefore pick up the bad habits, will observe the bad habits and think that these are good habits, these are what is required. In fact, they're not required, they're bad habits. An advantage again is that the observer has the opportunity to develop relationships within the team. So when shadowing occurs, the observer may know the person that he or she is observing, but may also get to know other members of that particular section or that particular team and build up knowledge of their experiences and of the requirements of the tasks by talking to other members of the team. A disadvantage is that there may be reluctance to share information, as some employees may feel intimidated. Sometimes the person who has been shadowed may not want to share all the information for various reasons. Job security. They may feel that they're being watched because the management wants to make them redundant, or they're being watched and they don't want to be watched. They feel intimidated, they feel it's intrusive. So there may be a reluctance to share everything. An advantage is there are opportunities for future employment, because the person who's doing the shadowing, the person who is observing, is picking up more skills. So hence widening his or her portfolio of skills, and will therefore be more employable in the future. The disadvantage is it can be difficult to schedule and can disrupt work patterns. Sometimes the person being shadowed doesn't want to be shadowed. They want to work fast and not have to explain everything and slow it down and show everything how it's worked and how it's done. They want to get the job done. And it's particularly important if they're on a bonus system and they're being paid for the amount of work they do. They'll certainly be very reluctant to do shadowing then. But it can be disruptive. An advantage is observe and take part in tasks, and this can increase confidence. The person who is doing the shadowing, the person who is watching and learning, will have increased confidence because they will see how the task is performed. They'll understand more about the task, and they can see the shortcuts and the tricks of the trade that the experienced person has perhaps learnt over the years. So they will have increased confidence. The disadvantage is it can be demotivating if experience is voluntary with no pay. Now, if the person being shadowed is not being compensated for passing on his or her knowledge, they may feel demotivated. They may think it's taken them years to accumulate this knowledge, and now they're asked to just pass it on freely to someone else. So they may become demotivated. Now let's move to project-related training. Again, advantages and disadvantages. In this case, the employee experience working in groups and take on leadership roles. So that's an advantage. The employees are working in groups, they're able to communicate with other members of the group, talk about their experiences and problem solve together, and they may even take on leadership roles. They may lead certain activities and have responsibility for certain activities. The disadvantage is working in groups can result in disagreements, and individuals may not perform their tasks adequately. Because there's a group, it doesn't mean it's a harmonious group. There could be a lot of infighting and disagreements in the group. So we can't say it's unambiguously good. There may be problems with group working. Another advantage is there are opportunities to gain skills and experiences. When working in this environment, this type of group situation, an individual can observe others and can ask for support and help and clarification of points. And by and large, the group will be interested in surviving as a group, and they'll be interested in helping. The disadvantage is it's difficult to organize team meetings when employees have other jobs and duties to complete. So if the team have a lot of work to do, then it's difficult to get everyone together to have some discussion of the activities that they're undertaking, have feedback and enable question and answers and reflection. And these are important issues, but it may be difficult to do that if the team are working flat out to try and achieve targets. An advantage again is that projects are aimed at a purpose and meet organizational aims and objectives. So projects are there for a purpose. They're not just random work situations. These are there with very specific work brief. And the brief is to get a certain task completed. That's why the group was formed. That's why this particular project is in existence. It may be that customers require a special product, a one-off product, or it could be that the company is trying out a prototype of something. These are there for a particular purpose, and this is a good way of dealing with it. The disadvantage is least competent group members tend to become overshadowed by more competent group members. Within groups, not everybody seems to be equal. Some within groups will be more dominant, some will have more to say, some will have very forceful opinions. Other members of the group will be shy and stand back. So there's a group, but it's not a homogeneous group. It's a highly, in fact, heterogeneous group, or it could be. And that would be a disadvantage, because some members of the group will be disadvantaged. Develop team working skills. All team workers share a common goal, and it's easier to complete tasks. Well, the fact that they're all in a group, it's in their interest to make the group work, so they will share skills. They will try to support each other, because they're all working towards a common goal, the completion of the task. So it becomes easier in that case. Now next, coaching and mentoring. And again, advantages and disadvantages. Start with the advantages. Well, flexible approach. Learning is at the pace of the learner needs. So it's coaching and mentoring is quite flexible, and the learner is learning according to his or her needs. They're learning the tasks that need to be known. The disadvantage is the coach or mentor may not have the right skills or qualifications. And that is a problem. Simply because someone is appointed as a mentor doesn't mean that they are ideal for that task. They may have poor communication skills, or they may have inadequate theoretical understanding of the tasks that they're asked to explain. So there may be problems with the mentor. Another advantage is feedback is instant and improvements made on the job. Well, if there is coaching and mentoring, and if someone is performing a task and not performing it very well, the mentor could step in and say it has to be done the following way, and this needs to be done, and that needs to be done. In other words, the feedback is instant, and the person performing the task is learning immediately. They've tried to perform the task, they were failing, and there was intervention by the mentor. A disadvantage is that senior management and staff may be unwilling to take on the task of mentoring, especially if the additional responsibility is unpaid. So why would anyone want to become a mentor if the task is unpaid or not rewarded? Why take on the extra work? Now some may find it an enjoyable experience. Some may do it because they see it as a very professional thing to do. Some want to help the organization. And in these cases, mentoring would work. But others may think, why take on extra responsibility and pass on experiences and have the problem of watching someone learning and correcting mistakes when they themselves are not compensated to do this. Next, the trainee is self-motivated and willing to learn. Well, if someone opts for a mentoring position where they're going to be mentored, it means that they are willing to accept criticism and points and directions. They're putting themselves in that position where they are going to attempt to learn, but they're going to learn under the scrutiny of a mentor. The disadvantage is it is a time-consuming task and requires motivation and dedication from the trainee and the mentor. It just doesn't happen. It's not costless. When a mentor and a trainee get together, they must discuss the tasks, they must discuss the processes, what's going to happen, the sequence in which the activity will take place, the type of tools necessary, the background research, the understanding of the task, and it is time consuming. It's not some small issue, it could be quite a large issue. And that time factor needs to be built in. It needs to be accommodated. Next advantage is opportunity to work with senior managers and staff. Well, if the mentoring is within an organization at a higher level, then the trainee may get to be mentored by a very senior member of management, and that would be very valuable experience. So it's an opportunity to be trained by someone who has particular skills and experiences. The disadvantage is mentors or mentor poor work ethic can have adverse effects on the trainee. There's an assumption that the mentor is a perfect individual. Well, the mentor may have bad habits and poor working standards and pass on those. The mentor may cut corners or have bad timekeeping or poor communication skills, or simply because someone is a mentor doesn't mean that person is perfect. There may be issues. Let's look at types of training. Well, we have e-learning and courses. We have reading and case studies, lectures and seminars, outdoor training and business-related games, and role play and behavior modeling. Now these are different types of training that we can consider, and let's talk about each of them in turn. We'll start with the e-learning and the courses. Again, advantages and disadvantages. Well, advantages: a flexible approach. Learning takes place around the learner's schedule. So if it's e-learning, the person can learn virtually any time he or she wants. They could learn after work or in the lunch break or on the bus on the way to work, or it's flexible. So it's providing the learner can gain access to the material through the network, then that means that the learner is capable of accessing the material and benefiting from it, but they need to have access to it. The disadvantage: well, learners with low motivation and poor study skills will fall behind. There is no routine structure of classroom environments. So e-learning requires discipline on the part of the students. They need to want to learn. They need to be interested in the topics and want the qualification or want the knowledge that the course contains. There's no routine structure. As I said earlier, they can learn on the bus, or they can learn anywhere they find themselves and they're free, provided they've got a connection. So there's no classroom environment. There's no single spot where this knowledge will be passed on. So it does require discipline, and that could be a problem. An advantage is online courses are cheaper and more accessible. There's no cost involved in travelling, for example. If the trainee or the student is to attend a college, perhaps in the evening or during the day, they have to travel to the college. They have to get transport there and get transport back. Unless, of course, they live next door to it, which is possible, but perhaps a bit unlikely. So there are costs involved in going to a college, but generally speaking, online courses are cheaper and more accessible, and there's no cost involved in travelling, so that's an advantage. The disadvantage is learners can become isolated and there can be limited face-to-face contact. A lot of online courses are dealing with this and trying to offer contact through video conferencing, for example, or the use of videos. But if it's going to be what's known as synchronous, in other words, real, live, two-way interaction, the student and the tutor, then some sort of conferencing facility would be probably the best way of doing it. So that's a space that needs to be watched because the technology is improving and perhaps the issues mentioned there will be addressed in the future. Another advantage is learning is tailored to the learner needs. The learner can, generally speaking, pick what he or she wants to learn. And the internet is a vast resource of learning materials. The disadvantage is technology issues. It may be difficult to access online resources. Perhaps people can't get a Wi-Fi signal very easily, or perhaps the signal breaks, or there's limited bandwidth, or whatever. There may be technological issues which may be a disadvantage. Another advantage is it builds self-knowledge and learner confidence. Learning is geared to the learner's pace. This is very important because the learner is able to perhaps read the material several times, perhaps watch the same video many times. A bit like we're doing here. It may be possible for you to look at this video and make some notes out of it and go back and later on look at the same video again. It's like having the same class twice or three times or whatever. At a traditional college that would not happen. It would happen once. And if you happen to be late for the class because of traffic or some hold-up, you've missed that part. That's it. Or you may attend and the tutor or the lecturer is away ill, in which case you've missed the whole class. The disadvantage here is that learners need to be IT literate and demonstrate computer-based competency. Well, that's getting easier as well. And a lot of people now have the skills to do this and the confidence to do it. They may simply open a browser, type in an address, and they've registered on the course, click a join button or equivalent, and they're in. They are now have access to the learning materials. So I'm not sure if it is a big disadvantage anymore. It's treated as a disadvantage in the literature, but in fact a lot of people have high levels of computer literacy, and these are increasing as time goes by because the internet is more pervasive. It's more a part of our lives. Now, reading and case study. Well, the advantage here would be the use of case studies help to analyze complex concepts and theories. Case studies are good examples. They illustrate some situation that has occurred and illustrates some issue that relates to perhaps some theories, but it shows how in practical terms how the issues were resolved. So the case study sets up the problem and then shows how the problem was solved. And that's quite useful. It's a good learning experience. The disadvantages: the use of case studies is time consuming, especially for short-term training courses. If a training course is just running over a couple of days, then asking the students to read a case study and analyze it may take the best part of a whole day, in which case the benefits of the training course may be lost. It might be better to ask the students in advance to read the case study and then be prepared to discuss it in a 1-hour session, perhaps during the training event. But the use of case studies can be time consuming, and they need to be handled with care. The learner can relate to real-life situations and apply solutions to workplace problems, and that's an advantage. Reading a case study, perhaps sometimes we can see ourselves in the case study. We can see the situation. We can see the problem, and that's what the case study is about. It's about a problem that we may recognize or imagine could happen to us in business or in whatever area we're looking in terms of the case study. And we can see the solution. We can see how this problem was resolved and what the people who resolved it went through in finding the solution. A disadvantage is it can be difficult to find case studies that are relevant to the training course. There are many case studies, but it's difficult to always find one that exactly matches the situation we want to consider. There's a search problem, and getting access to the precise one we want may be a real issue. An advantage is reading develops knowledge of concepts and theories and their applications. So when we do some reading in an area, or look at a case study, or perhaps just read an article, we can see the theories, we can see what's been set out in terms of the theoretical structure. We can also see how that structure sheds light on the practical problem, and we know from the theory what are the likely outcomes, and we can see what the likely outcomes are when, if you like, the data from the case is inserted into the theory. So case studies and articles and this type of literature are particularly useful in looking at how theories can help us to understand the world in which we live. The disadvantages: well, there can be more than one right answer. Different people will have different perspectives on the right solution. Problems with validation. Which one should be picked? Sometimes when we have a real world problem in business or in any aspect of our life for that matter, we may ask family and friends for recommendations, and we may get a whole variety of suggestions. Well, which one should we pick? We asked people to try and make recommendations, and I suppose we were really hoping that everyone would give the same answer. If they did, we would have a lot of confidence in that answer. But if the responses were varied, it could lead to even more confusion. Another advantage is encourage a range of skills: analytical, communications, team working, and problem solving. When we read a case study or read articles and discuss the articles, we are trading ideas. We're discussing ideas with colleagues. We're working perhaps as a team to try and get a greater insight into a situation. And we're trying to work out what the problem, or how the problem can be resolved. A disadvantage here is that case studies and articles and this type of literature is really aimed at the more sophisticated student, the one who's able to make the jump between what's on the paper to his or her practical experiences and can see the relevance of what has been read in the context of some issue they're confronting in practice. So it's quite an advanced activity. So reading a case study does require a good level of maturity. The reader must approach it in a way which almost welcomes the material. It's expecting the material to shed light on some issue and is looking for the insights that the literature will give. But it is not suitable for very basic problem solving. It's a more sophisticated type of problem solving. Now let's look at lectures and seminars. These are widely used in colleges and at universities. Let's look at the advantages and disadvantages. Well, the advantages, the method is good for larger groups of students. A lecture could have 100, 200 students, and the lecture is delivered to all of them. They each receive the same experience, the same knowledge. So it is an advantage in the sense of a good way of disseminating information. It's efficient. The disadvantage is it doesn't meet all learning styles. Some students don't learn from that. They go to a lecture, they sit down and make notes. It's a one-way process. The lecturer delivers the lecture. The students receive the lecture. The lecturer speaks it and demonstrates it, perhaps using slides and notes or apparatus of some sort, and the students make notes. Students may learn more if there were interactive sessions, but then again, this may happen in tutorials. They may happen in other parts of the learning framework, the other parts of the university or the college or different parts of the building. There may be rooms set aside for experimentation or for more hands-on type of activities where the ideas that are covered in the lecture can be tested out. But it doesn't meet all learning styles. Some students may appreciate more one-to-one or more question and answer type situations or case studies, as we just mentioned earlier, rather than lectures. Another advantage is that learning aims and objectives can be set to the pace of the learner, making this more student-centered. So a good course, well designed, will have learning outcomes, and the learning outcomes can be assigned to the different lectures. In a lecture, the student should understand the following at the end. There's a presumption that the students don't understand at the start, but they will understand at the end. And if they do understand the particular topic at the end of the lecture has been productive. Disadvantage is it's one-way learning. The lecture dictates information to the learner. As I said earlier, it is one way. Information is flowing from the lecturer to the student. There's nothing flowing back. It's a one-way process. Large amounts of information can be communicated, further challenging the student. So that's an advantage. In lecture situations, or in seminars for that matter, quite sophisticated ideas can be discussed. And this can be challenging to the student who has to try and work out why that particular situation is the way it is, or is the way it's portrayed by the lecturer. So it may cause the student um, um, to move towards doing more work, more reading, more analysis in the area. Now, disadvantage is students are in a passive rather than active role. This may hinder learning. The students in a lecture, they just sit there and write notes or draw diagrams or whatever it is. So they're very passive. They don't speak. They're in a lecture. It's the lecturer who speaks. The lecturer delivers the knowledge. Whereas the student receives it. It's a one-way process, as I said earlier. Another advantage is the lecturer has better control. The lecturer is able to control the pace of the lecture. Now, if it's a good lecture, if the person is experienced as a lecturer and well trained, he or she will know the pace to go at. Will know that there is a sequence of points and issues to be discussed one after the other, and these should be delivered in a way which makes them clear and how the points are connected. But the lecturer is in control of that. The disadvantage is the lecturer must have good speaking skills and subject knowledge in order to engage the students. If the lecturer doesn't have good speaking skills, if the lecturer is not audible or can't be easily heard at the back, the people at the back are going to have a bad experience. And if the lecturer doesn't really understand the subject, it'll become apparent to the students that the lecturer does not understand the subject, and therefore they will become disengaged. Now let's go to outdoor training. And again, advantages and disadvantages. Well, advantages: develops team working skills and relationship with colleagues. It's outside, it's an activity, they tend to work in teams, they tend to work together, they get to know each other, and they build up working relationships. The disadvantages: outdoor training can be costly to set up and time consuming. It's not cheap. And there are all sorts of issues that need to be considered. Health and safety, travel, all sorts of issues that need to be factored in, which makes it a costly and time-consuming activity. Another advantage is it encourages team working and problem-solving skills. When there are outdoor training activities, sometimes the trainees are organized into groups and they may be set particular tasks, and they have to work as a team to try and solve the problems and perhaps even develop skills, develop new skills to solve the problems. The disadvantage is not suited to everyone's learning needs. Some employees may dislike working in groups or attending learning events. Some employees want to work on their own. Some employees are happy working on their own. They don't want to necessarily work as a member of a group. They might have a lot of skill, a lot of competency in many areas. They may be very efficient and very capable. They just simply don't want to work with others. They don't want to work in a group. Now, should the management therefore replace them? Because if they do, they're losing a valuable resource. So should the management force them to work as a part of a group? Well, that's not going to make the employee happy. Far from it. So there are issues to be considered there. Activities such as role play and games help with employee motivation. At least that's what's considered. The role play is when a member of a team may adopt the role of someone else, may adopt the role of the managing director or of the finance director, and will pretend to be that person. But that means being realistic. They have to know what the job entails. They have to know what the issues are. They have to know how to work effectively in that role. So they have to empathize with the person who holds the position in practice, and they have to understand all of the issues that are possible, that may confront themselves in that position. It can help because it gives the person who is role-playing a different perspective. The disadvantage, well, a kind of a negative impact on productivity if all employees are not attending a scheduled day at work. Outdoor training schemes sound good, but for them to happen, the workers must be taken away from productive activities to the outside to engage in the training scheme. Whilst they're in the training scheme, they're not producing, so it's not productive. And that's a balancing act that must be addressed. Advantage, attending conferences and seminars enables networking skills. It's good for particular members of companies to attend seminars and conferences and work gatherings. It could be professional work gatherings, chambers of commerce or institute of directors or whatever it is. And in this arena, be able to network and talk to other attendees who have similar roles or work in similar organizations, and they're able to exchange ideas about good practice and discuss the impact of perhaps more macro issues, or the likely impact of more macro issues on their organization. Now, business-related games. Well, advantage and disadvantages. It encourages problem-solving skills. It's a business-related game, so the issues under consideration will tax the participants, but enable them to study perhaps all of the business, not just perhaps the limited perspectives of the business that they've got from their own working experiences. So, for example, if the attendees to these games they came from, let's say, the engineering department, they may be able to get an insight into what happens in the marketing department or in the finance department, or they may just have a wider perspective at the end. Disadvantages, well, can cause boredom of activity if it's not suited or it's not pitched at the right level. So it can cause boredom. Attending business games sounds like fun, but if the attendees are not really that motivated, or they don't see the point of it, or they don't like these type of events, they can become quite bored and quite alienated. An advantage is related to real-life scenarios and demonstrates principles and concepts, which is a good thing. A good thing in the sense that they're able to relate the games to different scenarios and consider different possible outcomes in different situations, and look at business principles and how the business principles fit in to the resolution of problems perhaps, and look at different concepts and the importance of these concepts. The disadvantage is the learner is guided through the correct procedures, but may not understand the logic behind their actions. So sometimes in business games, the person running the game may move the game along and leave certain areas unexplained, or leave certain areas just touched upon, not fully worked into the solution, so that it's leaving more questions than answers in the mind of the participants. So perhaps the game has a certain time dimension. It must be completed within a certain time frame. If that's the case, then perhaps it may leave more questions than answers, and may therefore be quite frustrating to the attendees. The activities are fun and entertaining and encourage motivation. That's what is hoped that will happen with business games. That the attendees will find it interesting, will find it challenging, but they have to make decisions about perhaps marketing or advertising expenditure or setting the price and looking at competitive situations, and they find it perhaps entertaining and fun, but at the same time it's giving them an insight into the real situation in which companies operate. The disadvantage is it can cause unnecessary pressure if employees are put under unfavorable circumstances. If a team is losing and making bad decisions, they may become the joke of the other teams. The other teams may start to deride them, start to laugh at them, and that's humiliating and frustrating and annoying. They've made almost understandable mistakes. They didn't read situations properly, or they were just unlucky in their decision making, that they chose the wrong route or whatever it was, and now they're being mocked by the other teams, and that's frustrating and annoying, and can be very can lead to disengagement. They don't want to be a part of it anymore. So the employees are under pressure to try and make the right decisions. And it could also be the case that an individual member within a team has made some bad decisions, some faulty decisions, and the other members of the team have turned on him or her. And again, that puts pressure on the attendee, who may feel alienated and removed from the group and simply does not want to participate. It's a bad experience. Another advantage is builds team cohesion and encourages healthy competition. And you'll note here, of course, a lot of the advantages are exactly the opposite of the disadvantages, which of course is what we would expect. But it builds team cohesion. It's hoped that business games and attending business games will encourage team cohesion and encourage healthy competition. That teams will be formed and they will work together, they'll get to know each other, they'll discuss issues, they'll discuss the game and how it should be played, and they will make good decisions and have an enjoyable experience. But they'll also get this insight into the real business situation that companies face, the competitive situation that companies face. The disadvantage is it doesn't really encourage critical thinking. They're making decisions, they're trying to do some analysis, but there are so many variables in play and so many different opinions floating around in terms of the game and the members of the various groups who are involved in the game, that critical thinking and almost logical thinking may be, in a sense, wrecked by unusual behavior or unusual decision making by other teams who do the unexpected. So the situation doesn't necessarily develop in terms of a smooth development. If you can imagine the curve of development being nice and continuous and moving towards a conclusion. In practice, business games may be very chaotic, with sharp swings in terms of profitability or market share or employment or whatever it is. So, in fact, when business games are played out, the attendees are dealing with almost chaos. They're dealing with situations which are very difficult to predict. And that means critical thinking and logical thinking may not help. It may be perhaps more emotional than logical. Role play behavior modeling. Well, advantages and disadvantages again. Advantages of role play and behavior modeling. Well, interactive activity and fun to take part in. So it's a role play. Someone is almost pretending to be someone else. They're pretending to be the chairman of the board of directors, or they're pretending to be the marketing director or whoever. So it's interesting. It's a fun thing. They're trying to work out what does that person do in practice and what can they do and how should they make decisions. The disadvantage is not all learners will take part, especially if they're shy, for example. It can be threatening and intimidating activity. Role-playing can be, it requires a certain personality. It requires someone who is outgoing and confident. Some people may be shy and reluctant to speak in public and reluctant to give their views in case they're laughed at or in case they make mistakes. So they may be shy and more introvert. Participating in role play situations can be threatening and intimidating because other participants may take advantage of the fact that this is not the real person. This is the real person, pretending to be someone else. So they're not attacking the real person, they are attacking the person that they are role-playing, this fictitious character they're role-playing. But of course, the person who is role-playing may feel this as a personal attack. So there are disadvantages in role-playing. It encourages experiential learning. Learners are put into real-life situations. That's the whole idea of role-play. It's trying to give them the experience of that situation. And they're trying to learn the real-life experience, the real-life situations, and then reflecting. Very similar to Cobb's theory. They are reflecting on what happens, and through the process of reflection they get a greater insight into what happened. So it encourages experiential learning. They're learning from experience. That's the point. The disadvantages does not put the learner in a real-life situation. Role plays are controlled activities and mainly guided. So even though it's role play, there will be a moderator of some sort. There will be someone overseeing the game who will intervene from time to time and lay down the rules as to what is allowed and what's not allowed, and perhaps may limit the role play activities. So it's not entirely realistic. Admittedly, in business, the marketing director or the chairman of the board or whoever it is will of course be bound by the rules of the country, by the laws of the country. Not just the laws that apply to everyone, but the additional company laws that are laid down, and will have to abide by um, government directives and so on in terms of their business practice. But in terms of role play, the moderator or the person running the role play situation may intervene from time to time to ensure that there is not too much intimidation or too much criticism, or to ensure that it's kept in terms of a learning experience. It's the concepts and principles can be portrayed through role play activities. That's the idea, that when a role play activity is set up, then concepts and principles can be portrayed through this. In other words, the participants will get a stronger understanding of concepts and principles, business concepts and business principles, because they have to make decisions. And the decisions will be based on these concepts and these principles. And they may find that the concepts and principles are restricting their decision making or guiding their decision making. It all depends. But the point is that they're working within that framework. So they are learning that the framework is important. Now, the disadvantage, if not carefully constructed, can cause confusion, especially if the activity involves larger groups of learners. If there is a large group of learners, then the role play can be very complex, particularly if there are many people playing roles. It's difficult to work out who's playing what role and how they're interacting. It can become a very complex situation, and it's easy to get lost in the various activities of the game. So it needs to be controlled. It needs to be managed carefully. But of course, if it's controlled and managed very carefully, it may not be a true reflection of what happens in real life. Finally, the last advantage is it allows the learner to be confident and encourages critical thinking. If someone takes on a particular role, they may learn a lot from the role. They may learn the constraints that apply in real life. They may learn the boundaries of their own decision making, what they're able to do and not able to do. They become confident because they're now in a position of exercising power within that domain, within that role they've adopted. So they may become more confident, and they may become quite protective and capable of critical thinking and much more political, looking at others who are playing different roles. They may become political and seek to form alliances or seek to wage war almost on certain members by undermining those members and getting them removed, getting them discredited. And this would be in a commercial sense, a very professional commercial sense. That's what happens in real life. So they're becoming confident, and they can become quite critical in their thinking. The disadvantage is difficult to assess if learning is taking place. It's very difficult to assess. It's an experience, but what was learned will be very difficult to assess. What was known before the activity in terms of their critical thinking and their confidence, like in the previous point, or has the activity itself engendered these attributes? So it's very difficult to assess the whole thing. And that concludes this very long video. So I hope you've had several breaks. You've stopped the video many times and returned to it. All the information you require is really on the slides, like the one we've got in front of us at the moment. It's worth freezing it, cutting off the sound, and just copying out these various for and against points and considering those. But that's all we're going to deal with in the video. You're probably pleased to hear. So let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.